All right, if you haven't already, I invite you to open your Bibles to Revelation chapter 13 today. Last week we had to cut things a little bit short because our worship service went long, and so we did not have time to get through everything that I had prepared for us for class. For those of you who were here, you'll remember that we're in the middle of a discussion about the beast that is revealed here in chapter 13. And what I would like to do here today is I'd like to pick up where we left off last week, but also complete the chapter here this morning. In some ways, it actually kind of works out well because what we're going to talk about today is really just an extension of what we started to talk about last week. So it will be good for us to come back here this morning and kind of sum all of that up and then also include some new information from the rest of the chapter. Now, if you recall, in our study of the beast, I put it under three different headings. First, in verses 1 through 3, you had the arrival of the beast. Then in verses 4 through 7, you have the authority of the beast. And then finally, in verses 8 through 10, you have the adoration of the beast. That last part, the adoration part, is the part that we did not have time to go over last week. And the adoration, or I think I used the word acclaim last week, but I switched it this week, it all has to do with worship, okay? We're talking about there are going to be those who worship the beast, and this chapter will also talk about the result of those who refuse to worship the beast. Today, I'm going to keep our alliteration going here with the letter A, and I'm going to add verses 11 through 18, and we're going to talk about the advocate of the beast. So really just two headings that we're going to explore here this morning, which is the last two, number 3 and 4, the adoration of the beast and the advocate of the beast. Now, so that we don't just kind of jump into this cold here this morning, let me remind you what we learned under the first two headings last week. As we looked at his arrival, we saw the dragon was standing on the shore of the sea, and that he is summoning this beast out of the abyss. Now, the beast himself is just a metaphor. It's just a picture. This is not a literal beast that is coming out of the sea. We're talking about a man here, a man and the eventual government and military might that he will represent. But what Revelation is doing here is taking its cue from the book of Daniel, where Daniel has this dream about all these anti-God empires that are going to come, and they are represented as beasts in his dream. And Daniel saw 4 beasts in his vision in Daniel chapter 7. There was one that was like a lion. There was one that was like a bear. Then there was one that was like a leopard. And then there was the final one, which was unlike anything else. As a matter of fact, it's not even really described according to any other animal, except for to say it had 10 horns upon its head. Well, if you look again here at the beginning of chapter 13 at this beast that is rising up out of the sea, it too has 10 horns on its head, thus signaling to us that we're talking about the same thing here, the same beast that Daniel's talking about, John is talking about here in Revelation. And the thing that's worthy of noting is this beast that is rising up out of the sea has all the characteristics of the previous beasts that Daniel has mentioned: the lion, the bear, and the leopard. And so what we're seeing here is this final beast, this final ruler, this final government. It will have the majesty of a lion like Babylon. It will have the power of a bear like Persia and Cyrus the Great, and it will have the swiftness of a leopard like Greece and Alexander the Great and his swift takeover of the world at that time. Okay, but even though it has all of these characteristics, it will be its own beast, and it carries all of the power of these other ones, which is inspired by Satan. Okay, so that was the appearance. When it came to the authority in verses 4 through 7, we find out that the beast does not have an authority that is derived from itself, but an authority that is derived from Satan. Okay, This is what happens when Satan and his angels are cast down to the earth from chapter 12. They are confined to the earth, but they carry out the rest of their time on the earth by inspiring this final world government, this final ruler who will take his offer to rule over the kingdoms of the world and will persecute God's people. This beast is going to be blasphemous. It is going to blaspheme against God, and it is also going to make the claim to be God, God in human flesh, complete with his own version of the death and resurrection. Remember, we saw in verse 3 last week that its head is wounded, but it comes back to life. And we've speculated about whether or not that will be a real resurrection or it will be some kind of illusion. But regardless of whether it is real or false, this beast is going to blaspheme God and will claim to be God in human flesh. So that brings us back to where we ended, where we stopped last week, and the bell kind of interrupted us. So today we're going to resume our study by talking about this third section here, which is the adoration of the beast. And as I was saying earlier, adoration is another way of talking about worship, which is exactly what is going to happen here beginning in chapter 13 and verse 8. So read it with me. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names, that is, who have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. And then we can also take what we see here and we can go back up to verse 4 here of the same chapter and notice what is said there. People worshipped the dragon because he had given his authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast, and they asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? All right, so we see here in these verses that this beast, this Antichrist, this anti-God government is going to be worshipped by most people, okay? But according to verse 4, who are the people really worshiping by worshiping this beast? Worshiping Satan, that's right. Which really shouldn't be a surprise to us. That has always really been true about any kind of false worship. If we are worshiping anything other than the one true God, whatever we may believe about any such thing, the truth is we are worshiping Satan because we are children of Satan if we are doing that. That's what Jesus told the Jewish leaders in the Gospel of John that was so offensive to them. Jesus said to them, Satan is your father. And they replied, that can't be true. We have no father but God himself. But Jesus says, no, it is true because you are of your true father and you do what he pleases. If you were of God, if God were your father, you would do what pleases God. And what pleases God is you believe in Jesus as the Messiah, okay, which they did not do. Now, it's hard to know what it is that is going to make the world worship the beast. And by all here, it says all will worship the beast. I don't take this to mean every single individual on the earth, as if there'll be no holdouts and rebels. As we have noted before, especially in Daniel chapter 11, there is a description there of battles that will happen against the Antichrist by other countries and other places. And so it does seem like he will be opposed at least part of the time. Certainly it will be true that Jewish believers and Gentile believers will not worship the beast, but the vast majority of the world will. That's the point here. And he is going to have incredible power and incredible influence and sway over the rest of the world. Now, interestingly enough, I want to take you on the screen back here to Daniel chapter 9 for just a moment. We looked at this passage last week where Daniel speaks about the authority and the power that this final beast will have. But here is an interesting tidbit about what his policy will be like. Look at Daniel chapter 9, beginning in verse 26. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He, that is the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. And in the middle of that 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end is decreed and is poured out on him. Okay? So here's a picture of what the beast is going to do. He's going to make a covenant with Israel for 7 years. That's who the many are that is referred to in this passage here in Daniel. But in the middle of that 7-year period, he is going to put an end to it. He's going to renege on his covenant, and he is going to stop the sacrifices that are going to be made in that temple. Now, I have often wondered if this covenant that he is going to make with Israel is what is going to allow them to actually rebuild the temple and begin doing sacrifices again. But the suggestion here is that halfway through, he's going to put a stop to that, and he is actually going to put an image of himself into the temple, and he's going to demand that people worship that. We'll say a little bit more about that as we move into the final verses here later this morning, okay? And it is at this time when he breaks the covenant that he is going to institute massive persecution against the Jews who do not believe in him. And this will include Christ believers as well. And it very well may be this either real miracle or faux miracle of his death and resurrection that will ultimately persuade people to worship him, which is just hard to believe, but it's part of the reality. Now, notice verse 10 back in our text. This is interesting. Here in verse 10, you have an important note to believers who are going to be alive during this terrible time. Now, one might wonder, okay, what should a believer do who finds themselves in the midst of this terrible circumstance? Because I'll tell you what the temptation will be. It's the same temptation we face today. The temptation is going to be to fight it, right? We got to stop this somehow. But to fight it is actually to fight against God's plans for how things are going to unfold. So instead, they are told, verse 10, if anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Okay, do you see what he's saying to the people of God here in this section? He's saying to them, you can't change this. Okay? You can't alter how this is going to unfold. So the best thing is not to fight it, but to accept it for what it is. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, it's going to involve real suffering for the people of God, but the point is, God will be with you. And so he says, if your fate is captivity, in other words, if your fate is imprisonment, don't fight it. Go. If your fate is to be killed or to be martyred, so be it. Don't fight it. Patiently endure as God unfolds his plan, and the promise is you will be delivered and you will be vindicated in the end. Okay? That's a hard word to believers, but that does appear to be what he's saying here at the end of this section. Okay? Now, that's where I would have ended class last week if I had had the time to get through all of the material that I wanted to get through. With the remainder of our time here this morning, we're now going to finish chapter 13 in this one last heading of this alliteration that I have been going through. So we've seen the appearance of the beast. We have seen the authority of the beast. We've seen now the adoration or the worship of the beast. Finally now, in these remaining verses, we're going to see the advocate for the beast. And this is really fascinating. So let's read together, beginning in chapter 13 and verse 11. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. And it exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up, notice this, an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And the second beast was given power to give breath to this image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of man. And that number is 666. So here we are. One of the most well-known and most speculated on passages in all of the Bible, and certainly in all of the book of Revelation. More ink has probably been spilled in writing about speculation about the mark of the beast and 666 than any other end-time address. Now, I told you all along that as I'm doing this class, I'm going to try to stay away from specific speculation, and I largely just want to stick to what the biblical text says. And today I'm going to do just a little bit of speculating, but I will clearly identify when I'm speculating and when I'm just bringing out the text here, so that you know the difference between what is authoritative text and what is Curtis Baker's very fallible opinion of things, okay? And so you'll want to keep that in mind. But I do want us to see this passage in the context in which it comes. And it all has to do with this second beast that is sent to accompany the primary beast. And since we don't have a whole lot of time here this morning because we had to play catch up from last week, I do want to look at this last section itself under 3 different headings, and I'm going to keep my alliteration with A's going here. I'm pretty proud of myself for finding A's for all of these things. But there is the arrival of the second beast, the authority of the second beast, and then perhaps most importantly his activity. So arrival, authority, and activity. The arrival comes in verse 11, and it's very much like the arrival of the first beast, but with this one slight difference. Whereas the first beast came up out of the sea, which kind of represents the abyss, this beast arises from the earth. Okay? And as I've mentioned to you before, once you get this full picture here, you have basically an unholy trinity. Satan corresponds to the Father, the Antichrist corresponds to the Son, and the false prophet sort of corresponds to the Holy Spirit. And that's what this second beast is. He is the last, and what we might say, the ultimate false prophet of history. Notice his appearance. He looks like a lamb. He has 2 little horns, like a cute little lamb, right? But he speaks like what? A dragon. okay, here is the imagery of deception. Who else is represented as a lamb in the book of Revelation? Yeah, Jesus is, right? And so the suggestion here is he is trying to present himself, this false prophet, as a Jesus type of character. Now, as a side note here, here's where I'll do a little bit of both fact and speculation. Okay, here's the fact first. In Islamic eschatology, and eschatology means end time studies, okay? In Islamic eschatology, they too believe Jesus is going to return. I don't know if you knew that about their beliefs. But they do not believe that he is going to return as the Messiah. There is another messianic figure in Islamic eschatology who is called the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam. Sometimes he is referred to. Now, not every Muslim person believes this, just as there are all sorts of end times beliefs within the Christian tradition, so also are there lots of end time beliefs in the Muslim tradition as well. So these, just as the Christian tradition has a view that fundamentalists usually take, in Islamic eschatology there is a view that fundamentalists tend to take. Okay. So the Mahdi, if you remember, I don't know if you remember some of the speeches that you remember when Ahmadinejad was president of Iran, and he would give some of his speeches before the UN. He would talk about this perfect one who was coming, who was the 12th Imam, or the Mahdi. That's who he was talking about in this case. And so the Mahdi in Islamic eschatology is the messianic figure. He's not Muhammad, but he is his own messianic figure. But then, this is interesting, who comes next in Islamic eschatology? Jesus then returns, the real Jesus of history. Okay? But he does not return in the way that you and I would imagine him returning in the Christian conception of things. He returns in the Muslim belief to tell people to give their allegiance to the Mahdi. Okay? He returns basically to say to Christians and Jews that the Christians were wrong all along and the Muslims were right, and therefore you are to give your allegiance to the Mahdi. Okay? Now that's just kind of a factual representation of some Islamic belief. Here's the speculation part. Okay? Can you imagine what a deception it would be to the world if you have one who arrives on the scene who claims to be the true Jesus and comes to tell Christians that they have been wrong all along? And he backs it up with this miraculous power, the ability to call fire down from heaven, and also this supposed death and resurrection of the beast who is wounded and then healed. Remember what Jesus said in our text in Matthew chapter 24 last week, that in the end the deception would be so strong that even the very elect, if it were possible, might be pulled away. And that would, if things happen to unfold in that particular way, that would truly be a deception that would send the world into chaos. And I kind of think about that as I watch things that are going on in the Middle East and beyond right now. Look at all the people who are mostly, secular, progressive type of people who would tend, for the most part, to be atheist in their belief system. But look at how much they are lining up behind Muslim Palestine. We even hear of some who are converting to Islam, which makes no sense. If there's anything that is anti-progressive, it would certainly be fundamentalist Islam. But there's this weird power at work in the world right now, a power that loves Muslims but hates Christians and Jews. Then you add that to, I didn't put a screen on this, but if you want to look in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4 in your own Bible, it's talking about those who are martyred in this last period. And notice specifically how they are martyred. Revelation 20 and verse 4. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. This is in the millennium. And I saw the souls of those who had been what? Beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God, they had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or hands. Isn't that interesting? That the way that the martyrs are talked about that they died is by being beheaded, okay, which is the typically favorite way of Islamic fundamentalists in that sort of thing. So that is speculation. That is so do not put your weight on that, okay? I want you to know that for sure. I'm not saying that is the way that it is going to happen, but there are these interesting parallels, and it makes you wonder, how else could Israel be allowed to rebuild their temple when there are Muslim mosques sitting on the Temple Mount? And perhaps it's because this leader that will arise will himself be of that sort, and so only he could have the power to make that happen. So again, all speculation. Could happen in a completely different way. For those of you who know other end times beliefs, they thought the final government comes out of a revived Roman Empire in Europe, and there's all that kind of speculation. And so there's, I don't know the way that it believes, but I just say that, put that in the back of your mind, let it sit there, and just consider that it could be one possible way that that could play out. So, done with the speculation. Let's go back now to what we know. So we've seen the arrival now of the second beast, the one that we're calling the false prophet, and his deceptive lamb-like nature. He will act like he is like the Christ, but in fact he speaks like a dragon. But now let's examine his authority. Look at verse 12 again. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. So now we get a sense for maybe how the world comes to worship this Antichrist beast. It is not simply because he's a great politician or a great military leader, but it will be because of the deceptive preaching and the deceptive signs of this false prophet who is the second beast. And it says here that he has all the authority of the first beast, and it exercises, its authority on its behalf. Okay. Now, even though it says it has all the authority of the first beast, who actually did the beast get the authority from? Yeah, from Satan. Okay. So Satan has granted his authority to the first beast, and apparently he also gives this authority to the second beast. And the first beast primarily seems to give himself to political and military endeavors, while this second beast, the false prophet, primarily gives himself to religious things and the deception of the end time period. Okay, but the second beast does not cause people to worship him. He causes them to worship the first beast, or the Antichrist. Okay. Now it is interesting to note that the text says that this false prophet is going to have incredible powers. It says in verse 13 that he will be able to call down fire from heaven in full view of the people. And we're kind of at a loss to know what he is talking about here. I think this is just one of those things that a person will have to be alive at that particular time period to know what exactly he's talking about. And once again, we don't know whether this is legitimate power that he will have, or if it is some kind of illusion that he will have of miraculous powers. You know, had we lived to any other time period other than our own, we might assume, yeah, this has to be some kind of legitimate power. But now, with all of the amazing technological things that we have available to us, it seems like, you know, any number of things could be possible, even from an illusionary nature, rather than that. But that leads then to the third and final aspect of his evil ministry, and this is what I want to spend the rest of our time looking at here this morning. I want to look now at the activity of this second beast. We know where he came from. We know whose authority he has. But what will he do? Well, there are two things that he is primarily going to do. The first will be something that he does in the temple that is being rebuilt in Jerusalem. As we noted before, this temple is going to have to be rebuilt. It says in verse 14 that with the power that he has over the world, he is going to persuade people to worship the beast, and to do that, he is going to set up an image of this beast in the temple. And he's going to demand that people worship it. Now, this should come as no surprise to us because we've already been reading from Daniel chapter 9 this morning. Let me go back again and show you what it says. Daniel chapter 9, verse 26. The end will come like a flood, war will continue, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7, and in the middle of that 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, notice this now, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end is decreed and is poured out on him. So here we have the same reality that is spoken of in the book of Daniel that is now spoken of here in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 14. It is not going to be the Antichrist himself who sets up this image in the temple. It's going to be the false prophet who sets up this image and is going to stir up the world to worship him. But notice what it says about the image in verse 15. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. Now, what in the world could that possibly mean? Well, first of all, it's interesting to note that it is said that he was given power to give image to this, give breath to this image. So who gives him the power to do this? Well, we assume Satan is going to be the one who gives him the power. But either way, it is God who is actually allowing this power to be given. Okay. Now, this would be another place where we could do a lot of speculation if we wanted to. But again, because we live in the time period that we live in, and all the technological advances and that kind of stuff, think about the world that is developing with AI and all that kind of stuff. You can imagine now an image that's not just an idol like the Old Testament sense, a piece of wood, but is some sort of image that can actually speak and control sorts of things. Okay? Now, all of that is speculation, but what is not speculation is what John points to here, what Daniel confirms, and also what Jesus confirms in his own teaching about this. Listen to Jesus in Matthew 24, verse 15. So, when you see standing in the holy place, and what would the holy place be? The temple. When you see standing in the temple, the abomination that causes desolation. That means this is an abomination that causes widespread death. Spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are on the housetop not take anything out of their house. Let not the one in the field go back to get their coat. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be a great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. Okay? Here's this great distress that is going to happen because this image is going to be set up. It's going to be demanded of the people that they worship, and those who do not worship are going to be ostracized, because there is going to be something given to identify those who truly worship the beast and its image, and it will be a mark, they say, either on the hand or on the forehead. And nobody will be able to buy or sell or to do business without that mark, which signifies that they worship the beast. And that's what leads to what Jesus calls here a great distress that will be unequaled from the beginning of the world until now. Daniel 12 says it this way: at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. Okay. So this is going to be a time of great hardship for believers, for Jewish believers, for Christian believers, Gentile believers, because people are going to be forced either to worship the beast and take this mark that he gives, or to die for your faith. Okay? And the question, of course, is, all right, what will this mark look like? And we don't know for sure. And as you know, there are worlds of speculation about what that is. Now, one thing I will say as we close class here this morning is that we want to be sober-minded about this. There are a lot of people today who are afraid to use, various means of electronic payment, or, use your Apple Pay on your phone or that kind of stuff, because they think, oh, well, all this could be the mark of the beast, and you don't want to be deceived into taking. But I'm quite confident that when that time gets here, you will know that there is a choice here, because the choice will be, if you take this, you're worshiping the beast. If you don't, you will not. So I don't think you have to be worried about various forms of electronic payment, although all this does show us how technology has made this possible, and how we could see something like this certainly very well instituted. Now, there is this issue of the number here, 666. What does that mean? And people have tried all sorts of things. They've tried to calculate mathematically and to say, well, it stands for Hitler, or it stands for, and they do all these kind of silly things for it. But here's what I think that means. What's God's number? 7. Okay, number 7 is the number of perfection. It's the number of the days of creation, the number of the 7 spirits at the beginning of Revelation. Okay, God is perfect. The number 666 is just representing that it's man's number, less than perfect, less than God. And so what the message is trying to say is, even though this beast is going to be powerful, even though it's going to be blasphemous, even though it's going to claim divine status, what the book is saying to us is, it's really just a man. It's really just a man, and he will pay the man's price for that. Now, I'll tell you a funny story to end on. Whenever I first moved to Lubbock, there were 2 ways that I could drive home. One way was to take I-27 up to Amarillo, and then take I-40 all the way across Oklahoma, and then 44 up to Deal. But I learned that there was a shorter way later on, which is you could take this back highway in between Lubbock and Wichita Falls, and then you can take I-44 all the way from Wichita Falls to Joplin, Missouri. So anyways, the first time I drove that, I don't know if you all have heard of this before, but there is the 4-6 Ranch out in West Texas. And I remember I was driving on this back highway, and I started seeing all these red barns with 6666 across all of the deal, and all these entranceways with 6666. And of course, I was just a kid, I was 18 years old, and I was like, there's some cult that's out here, and this is like some kind of satanic cult that is living out here in the desert of West Texas. But I later figured out, some of you all may know this story, but the guy actually won that ranch in a hand of poker. And the hand that he won it with was 6666, 4 6s. And that's why it is called the 4-6 Ranch. And so it was not a satanic cult after all. But that just goes to show you what kind of wild speculation is out there with that kind of thing. So anyways, I hope that was interesting to you. And next week will be our last class until we take our summer break, and we'll try to finish chapter 14 next week. So look forward to it, and you all have a wonderful week.